Good morning. I hope everybody's doing well today. Today we are going to start a new book. We're going to start The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It was requested to me yesterday when we finished Animal Farm, and I thought, why not? So let's get started. If this is your first time watching this, we're not just going to read the words. We're going to stop and talk about interesting vocabulary words or phrases that maybe if you're learning English, you don't understand. And I'm doing this live. So if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions in the chat because if you don't ask questions, I'll just stop sometimes and explain words I think you probably don't know, or words I think would probably be useful for you. But definitely, if you're watching this live, I encourage you to ask questions. So let's get started with Chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my head ever since. This word vulnerable means, it's kind of the opposite of strong. It kind of means weak. It means not very strong, easy to be a victim. Children are very vulnerable because they're not very strong. It's easy to make them the victim of something. So when he says, when I was younger and more vulnerable, well, that could be strong like this, but it could also be strong here, or weak here. So in my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my head ever since. So that means I've been thinking about it since he gave me that advice. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. Criticizing someone means to judge them in a bad way, very easily judge them in a bad way. So never judge people. If you feel like judging other people, thinking maybe bad things about their behavior, remember that they haven't had the same advantages as you. So I think here it means they haven't been as rich as you. You've grown up with a lot of money. So don't judge people who don't have money so easily. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. Okay, this gets complicated right away. So let's see. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. If you're reserved, that means that you're very careful about. Oh, my music finished. I put on some 1920s style jazz to go with it, but I think I forgot to loop it. So here, now I'm looping it. Okay, this is a book from the 1920s, or about the 1920s, so I put some 1920s style music in the background. Okay. To be reserved means to not show very much emotion, or to not say very much, not say what you're thinking, to be very careful about the feelings that you show or the words that you use. So he didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. So we've always had some kind of communication, but not communication in words or expressing emotions. I don't know, like a psychic communication. And I understand that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. So he's saying, because of this advice, he never judges people. He never thinks badly of people right away. a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me. And so because of this, he's always meeting very interesting people or unusual people. A habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim, if not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality, which appears in a normal person. Let me read that again. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician, because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. So he's saying because I had this tendency to surround myself with unusual people, it made other people suspicious of me. So he had this very innocent reason for keeping his judgment of other people. He's just taking his father's advice. Don't judge people because you've always been raised with a lot of money. You have to be very open and very kind and understanding of other people and their behaviors. So he's just following his father's advice, and which brings him into contact with very strange people or unusual people. He becomes friends with unusual people. And this makes normal people suspicious of him, thinking, what is he doing? Why is he with these weirdos? Most of the confidences were unsought, and frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. All right, so, and also because of this, people like to share secrets with him and tell him things. They think that he's someone who can be trusted. And sometimes people tell him horrible things. And most of the time he pretends to sleep or to be uninterested as people share these very dark secrets with him. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. So one of the reasons he ignores them is because he thinks people usually exaggerate or are just repeating something that someone else has said. They're not real. They're making them up to try to impress him. I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. A snob is someone who has a lot of money and thinks that people who don't have a lot of money are inferior to them. And so his father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So sorry, I just missed these questions. N is asking, what is privy? Privy means, it's related to the word private. So to be privy to something means that someone has shared a secret with you. Someone has shared something private with you. Where did they use that? Privy. I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. So that means they revealed secrets to me. They told me their secrets. To be privy. Do you know that another word for bathroom is an old-fashioned word that people don't use anymore, or not very much, but another word for bathroom is privy. It just means private or secret, or nobody knows about it, or nobody should know about it anyway. And And Amir says, what is reserved judgment? Okay, well, remember that reserve means to reserve judgment means to don't judge right away. If you reserve something, you're putting it off into the future. So if you make like a hotel reservation for your vacation next month, this is something that you're putting until the future. You're giving it to the future. So to reserve your judgment means don't judge now. Wait later until you understand more to judge something. Now, he says that his father... I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. Decency is good behavior. Fundamental decency is the good behavior that we all know is the right thing. So we all know that we should wear clothes in public. So that's a fundamental decency. That is just something basic that we all know is the right thing to do. But his father is telling him that fundamental decencies are parceled out, are given in different quantities unequally at birth. So people with more money behave, I think this is what he's saying, I'm not sure, but people with more money behave in a more decent way than people with no money. Which is a very snobbish attitude, because they think that they're better than people with no money. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I came to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him. Okay. Well, Amir, you said this was complicated, and you weren't wrong. Let's see. Let's go back and read this again. After boasting this way of my tolerance. So boasting is when you're proud of something and you want to share it with someone. So he's boasting about his ability to not judge people right away, to get to know people and understand where they're coming from before making any kind of judgment about them. He's boasting about that. I'm very proud of that characteristic of mine. I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct is another word for behavior. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. So this guy, whoever he is saying, yes, behavior, it doesn't matter if you have money or not. In the end, the way that you choose to behave as an adult is important. So in a way, he's kind of pushing aside what his father said. Because his father said, don't judge people who don't have money. That's not fair. But after some experience in life, he's saying, well, actually, in the end, when you become an adult, you decide how to behave. And it doesn't matter how you figured it out, with or without money. Good people will figure it out, and bad people never will. That's what he's saying here. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and had a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. So he's been spending his time socializing with very rich people, and he's tired of their behavior and their problems. He didn't want that anymore. He just wanted, I think he just wanted rules in his life and to follow those rules. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. So he was tired of all the rich people that he was socializing with, except for Gatsby. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. Scorn means kind of like hatred. Scorn is, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. That's scorn. So, an unaffected scorn means it's not fake. He really feels that. He really feels he doesn't like this behavior. So he's eliminating all of those people from his life. Rich people having fun, going to parties, going crazy. Except he's made one exception, Gatsby. He's still friends with Gatsby, even though he hates this kind of behavior. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, successful here means one follows another. It doesn't mean making money, or gesture means behavior, like your body movements. These are gestures. So if personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, movements, one following another. This is not successful like make a lot of money. Then there was something gorgeous about him. Some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. Okay, this responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby. Flabby means fat. If you could see my arm here, if I did this, it would jiggle. It would move like jello because I'm old and fat. That's flabby. And flabby is usually used to mean something extra and undesirable. And let's see, flabby impressionability, which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. What responsiveness is he talking about? Okay, I think we have to reread this again. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. I think what he's saying, this is really hard, but I think what he's saying is that Gatsby had a way of finding ways to be successful, ways to make money, of it is so natural for him to be successful in everything that he does. It's like he's a machine a sensitive machine that can register any little change so that he can be right there to find the good opportunity. That's why I think he says this responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability, which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. Well, it's really complicated. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which is not likely I shall ever find again. So he's not enjoying his life by following a plan, but it's just easy for him to respond to situations. He knows which way to go when something happens intuitively. I think that's how I'm interpreting it. But I'm not sure. It's pretty hard to understand. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-windowed elations of men. So it's fun to be around Gatsby. It's a great time. But there's always, I don't know if you know the word aftermath. I think we talked about that word in 1984 when we did 1984. But aftermath is like what happens after the bomb explodes. You know, the fallen buildings in the street, the dead people, the horrible, or what happens after the earthquake, the fallen buildings, the people in the street. This is the aftermath, the horrible thing that happens after something. So it's great to be around Gatsby. It's a lot of fun, but there's always a horrible aftermath, and that was a problem. Fari Boris says hello. Hi, Fari Boris. How are you doing today? No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It was what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. My family had been prominent, well-to-do. So prominent means important, and well-to-do means very rich. Well-to-do people in the middle western city of 3 generations, the Carraways, and something of a clan, as we have a tradition that we were descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But the actual founder in my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. N asks, what is short-winded? It's funny, I was just talking about that last night when I was doing David Copperfield. Because in that story, there's a big fat man, an old fat man who smokes a lot of pipes, and he can never breathe. That's being short-winded. But also, long-winded could mean talking using a lot of words. So if you know, there are 2 ways that you can always say something. You can say something in a very simple way, or wait, let me see if I can find an example. Again, from this book, this other book that I'm doing at night. Wait, let's see. Okay, in this other book I'm doing, David Copperfield, there's a man named Mr. Micawber, and he always says everything in a very ridiculous, hard-to-understand way. So let me read a quotation from Mr. Micawber. Copperfield, you perceive before you the shattered fragment of a temple once called a man. The blossom is blighted, the leaf is withered, God of day goes down upon the dreary scene. In short, I am forever flawed. So, all he's saying, this is a very long-winded way of saying, I'm having a very bad time in my life. Okay? So, the short-winded way is, I'm having a very bad time in my life. The long-winded way is what I just read to you, which is kind of annoying. So I think that's what, I mean, being short of wind is what I told you. Can't breathe. But I think here what short-winded men is referring to is men who don't say very much. Where do they even say that? What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Or actually, maybe short-winded here does mean not very much life, very short time living. It's probably what it means here. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that delayed Teutonic integration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter-raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, "Why, yes. Why, I don't know how to... Why, yes." I don't know. With very grave, hesitant faces, Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east, permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. I'm sorry, I just have to take a 1-minute break. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. N is asking about laconic. I don't remember seeing that word, laconic. Should we go back and read that? Because I don't remember seeing that. Let's see. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that delayed Teutonic integration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter-raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. All right. Oh, N is saying, no, I meant about short-winded, laconic. Let's see. So laconic means using very few words. Well, long-winded means using a lot of words. Short-winded usually means can't breathe. But I guess it could mean not using very many words. I wouldn't use it like that though. Let's see. If I just look up short-winded, what does it say? More definition. So one is a person who can't breathe. That's the only definition that Google gives for short-winded, is you can't breathe. I was just thinking because long-winded means talking unnecessarily, using unnecessary words, talking for a very long time, when you could say something in a very short, simple way, is called long-winded. All right, so this guy graduated from university, and then World War I happened, and he participated in World War I. He went to Europe, and he fought in World War I, and he actually enjoyed it. He says, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the counter raid so much that I came back restless. So when he returned to normal life, it was difficult for him to make that adjustment because he was used to the excitement of war. And where he's from, the Midwest of the United States, where also I'm from, he says it didn't seem like, when he left from the war, it felt like a nice, warm place. But when he returned, it seemed boring. And he says like the edge of the world, like nothing was there. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everyone I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, why yes, with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for 1 year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I had just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. Commuting means traveling to and from work. So a commuting town is a little city that is very close to the big city. Close enough so that you can travel every day to and from work easily. That's why it's called a commuting town. He found the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow at $80 a month. Wow, $80 a month for a house? That would be nice. But at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. I had a dog. At least I had him for a few days until he ran away, and an old Dodge, and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped on the road. How do you get to West Egg Village? He asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. So, one day, some stranger asks him for directions, and he's very proud to be able to show this person where to go. And suddenly he feels like he belongs to this community, like he's always been there. And he has a special feeling from that. And so with the sunshine and great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. But there was so much to read, for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas, Morgan, and McKenna's knew. Well, Midas was a famous king who was very greedy and never liked to share his money. I'm not sure who Morgan is. Mechanus, I think that maybe that was also a rich king in Greece. I'm not sure. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college. One year, I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News. And now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. To be well-rounded means to not know anything expertly, but to know a lot of things about a lot of different subjects. This isn't just an epigram. Well, let's epigram. A pithy remark or saying expressing an idea in a clever and amusing way. Oh, let's see. I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. So he had intentions that summer of reading a lot and many different subjects to become well-rounded, to know a lot of things or a few things about a lot of subjects. This isn't just an epigram. Life is more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. So he's saying being well-rounded isn't just a phrase that you can use that doesn't really mean anything. It really is true that you look at the world out of one window, so you should try to get the biggest view possible, I guess, is what he's saying. Hadi is saying good evening. Good evening, Hadi. How are you doing? It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on the slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York, where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay, just out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. Well, I think we should probably look at a map for a minute. Of course, this is a very famous place, Long Island. That's where a lot of people who work in New York live. But since he's taking so much time to describe it, we might as well see what it looks like on the map. So here's New York City on the left-hand side, and this peninsula coming out is called Long Island. And let's see, what did he say? West Egg? What a horrible name for a town. Egg. Who wants to live in a place called Egg? So apparently it's around here somewhere, I guess, if I remembered the name of the place correctly. Whoops. So we're talking somewhere around here, not very far away from New York City. Fast Cars says, is this the same Gatsby as the movie Great Gatsby by Leonardo DiCaprio? I didn't know that Leonardo DiCaprio did that movie. I guess because I'm old. I remember that in the 1970s, okay, I was a child in the 1970s. I'm not that old. But I do remember that they made a movie in the 1970s called The Great Gatsby, and the star was Robert Redford, who was a big, big movie star at that time. So I had no idea. I'm sure it must be the same Great Gatsby. I just didn't know that Leonardo DiCaprio did that. Let's see. Let me look it up. Hadi says scorn, looking down on someone. I don't think that scorn is looking down on someone. It just means that they feel angry or disgusted by someone. And maybe that could include looking down on them, but I don't think that it has to. Great Gatsby movie or film. Let's see. Oh yeah, I guess Leonardo I can't talk this morning. Leonardo DiCaprio did this movie in 2013, but I just remember the older version. Let's see, Robert Redford. They don't even show that on Google. Robert Redford. That's the one I know. That's from 1974, so that was like a year after I was born. That's the one I know. Okay, let's see. It was on that slender, riotous island, which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land, 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour, contour means like the shape, and separated by a courtesy bay, just out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They are not perfect ovals like the egg in the Columbus story. They are both crushed flat at the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular except their size. So these, maybe we can zoom. Do they really look like eggs? Well, I don't know what he's talking about, because I don't see anything on the map that looks like eggs. But anyway, I guess there's a west egg and an east egg or something like that, and they get their name from the shape. And, well, let me just show you a close-up on the map if you're curious. See, I guess... Well, I don't know. I don't really see anything shaped like an egg here. But anyway, he's saying that there are two places, they're shaped like eggs, but they're extremely different. And I get the feeling he's going to say they're different because one place is very rich and one place is very poor. But we'll see in a minute. But I think maybe he's talking about this one here and this one up here. But I'm not too familiar with the area around New York, so I don't really know. N is asking, is riotous noisy? Well, riot means making a lot of noise, yes. But sometimes riot can mean like having a good time. So if I say, oh, N, you're so funny, you're a riot, that means you always make me laugh. I always have a good time with you. Or, how was the movie? It was a riot. And that actually doesn't mean bad. That means it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So riot can also mean fun. And how did he use it here? It was on that slender, riotous island. So, and by the way, a lot of people from New York, a lot of very rich people from New York, they, for a very long time, even now, but starting a long time ago, a lot of people in New York, very rich people, they spend their summers in this part of Long Island at the very tip. I think that maybe that's like a 2-hour drive from New York. You've probably heard of the Hamptons. These are where the Hamptons are. Do they? It's hard for me to see. Yeah, here's East Hampton here. So this is where people from New York, very extremely rich people, have enormous, beautiful houses. And so it's very easy to go there for the weekend and have a great time, have a big party, and then go back to the city. So I think maybe the reason he's calling it riotous is because it's where they go to have a good time, but I'm not sure. It's not because it's noisy. Long Island I don't think that it's noisy, especially in the 1920s. I think it's like going out to the country. It's not noisy at all. I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two. Though this is the most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them, my house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for $12,000 or $15,000 a season. So you see here they're talking about the season. In the summer, the Hamptons become a very popular place to go and have fun. So the season is the summer season, and $12,000 or $15,000 for the season, which is like 3 months. That's like $4,000 a month. Let's see. That's a lot of money. I'm just asking, what was the value of $1 in 1920? So that would be about $15 now. $1 would be about $15 now. So, he was living in a very cheap place that rented, but he was living next to two very large houses that rented for $12,000 or $15,000. So let's see, 15 times 15 is, so that's almost like $200,000, but not for the year, for the season. So maybe 3 months. So that's like $70,000 a month in today's money that these other houses were renting for. The one on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under the thin beard of raw ivy. Spanking, let me show you a picture of spanking, so you know what it is. Oh, I have to be careful about what kind of pictures we get. Let's see. Hopefully something innocent. And no, okay, how about this? Okay. This is spanking. You see that picture? That's spanking. But it's funny, for some reason, I don't know why, but when you want to emphasize that something is extremely new, like it was just made, you can call it spanking new. Okay, so it doesn't mean anything about this, it's just something that you say. Brand spanking new. I don't know why we do that, but it's pretty common, actually, and that just emphasizes that it's not just new, was just made, just fresh. It's like fresh. Brand spanking new, spanking new. So this, one of the houses that he lived next to was designed like an old house in France. And they even put ivy. Maybe you don't know what ivy is. A lot of old buildings, especially in Europe, have ivy growing on them like this. And it looks nice. It adds some extra character. So in order to make these buildings look older than they were, people would plant ivy, and the ivy will grow on the walls, give it some extra charm. And so it was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new, under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore. An eyesore means something ugly. So if somebody had a bad night, maybe they stayed up all night working or drinking or doing drugs, in the morning when you see them, they look very horrible. You can say, "You're a sight for sore eyes." That means you look horrible. And so an eyesore is something very ugly. I wonder what kind of pictures we get if we look for eyesore. Oh, it just shows sore eyes. Well, that's unfortunate because eyesore... Okay. I finally found an example. Because all they're showing are pictures of sore eyes. But here's an eyesore. Look, you have this nice modern building on the left. And don't you think that probably they complain about these buildings next to them? Oh, I have this nice building. We have to tear down this building or improve this building because it hurts the eyes. It's an eyesore. That's what eyesore means. Do we have more of these? Yeah, so this is like maybe when you would complain. One house looks okay, the White House, but then the house next to it is an eyesore. Then the house next to it hurts your eyes. So this man is saying, my house compared to Gatsby's is an eyesore. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all $48 a month. All for $48 a month. So in today's currency, that would be about $6,000 a month. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water, and the history of the summer really begins on the evening I drove over there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin, once removed, and I'd known Tom in college, and just after the war I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure, in a way, one of those men who reached such an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. So he's talking. He's going to a party. And he's talking about the reason he's going to the party is because he's friends with one of the people from the house who he knew in Chicago and who he knew at Yale. And he's saying, when he was in college, he was at his very best. He was at his peak. He was at his climax. And now everything he does since then it's never going to be as wonderful as that time when he was 21. So we can get a picture of the fact that maybe he's kind of a sad or pathetic person in that way, because he can never do better than he did when he was 21 and playing football. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. I grew up in the Chicago area, so I know that Lake Forest is an extremely wealthy an extremely wealthy city north of Chicago. It's where all the rich people live. Why they came east, I don't know. They had spent a year in France for no particular reason, and then drifted here, and then unrestfully wherever people played polo and were rich together. This was a permanent movement, said Daisy over the telephone, but I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking a little wistfully for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. So they moved to New York from Chicago, and Daisy, I guess she's a relation. I think I missed that. She's saying it's permanent. They're here permanently. But he doesn't believe it because he knows this guy is always going to be looking for that excitement of when he was the star football player at Yale. And there's nothing, he's always trying to recover that feeling, and he never will. So he'll always be moving from place to place looking for that kind of excitement. And so it happened that on a warm, windy evening, I drove over to East Egg to see the two old friends whom I scarcely knew at all. Their house was even more elaborate than I expected, a cheerful red and white Georgian colonial mansion overlooking the bay. The lawn started at the beach and ran toward the front door of the quarter of a mile, jumping over sundials and brick walks and burning gardens. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines, as though from the momentum of its run, the front was broken by a line of French windows, glowing now with reflected gold, and wide open to the warm, windy afternoon, and Tom Buchanan, in riding clothes, was standing with his legs apart on the front porch. He had changed since his New Haven years. Now he was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with a rather hard mouth and supercilious manner. Okay, sturdy means like strong, not easy to move. Now, supercilious, I have no idea what that means. Let's look it up. Supercilious. Or supercilious. Let's see. Supercilious, behaving or looking as though one thinks one is superior to others. So if he has a supercilious manner, that means you can see from his expression he feels superior and better than other people. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body. He seemed to fill those glistening boots until he strained the top lacing, and you could see a great pack of muscle shining when his shoulder moved under his thin coat. It was a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body. His speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, added to the impression of fractiousness he conveyed. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, even toward people he liked. And there were men at New Haven who had hated his guts. Okay, so he's very strong and powerful looking, and he doesn't sound like he has a very nice personality. We have the word hate. When you say I hate something, we understand it's very strong. But when you're there's this word guts, which is an interesting word. Guts means like your digestive system. So if you say I have a gut problem, you're saying I have a problem with my digestive system. Sometimes the word gut can just mean stomach. So if I say, I have to go on a diet. Why? You're not fat. Oh, I'm getting a big gut. That means I'm getting a big fat stomach. So that word gut has to do with the digestive system or the stomach. Even doctors who deal with the digestive system are called gut doctors. But there's an expression, to hate someone's guts. And that means to really, really hate them. And that's what that means. So there were men in New Haven who hated his guts. So they didn't just hate him, they really hated him. Now, don't think my opinion on these matters is final, he seemed to say, just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are. We were in the same senior society, and while we were never intimate, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own. So he's saying in school we kind of knew each other. We weren't really good friends, but I always had the feeling that he wanted me to like him in his weird sort of way. I got a nice place here, he said, his eyes flashing about restlessly. Turning me around by one arm, he moved a broad, flat hand along the front vista, including in its sweep a sunken Italian garden, a half-acre of deep, pungent roses, and a snub-nosed motorboat that bumped the tide offshore. It belonged to Domain, the oil man. He turned me around again and politely and abruptly, "Well, go inside." We walked through the high hallway into the bright rosy-colored space, fragilely bound into the house by French windows at either side. The windows were ajar. We've seen that word ajar before, which means a little bit open. So if the windows are ajar, that means they're a little bit open. If a door is ajar, this is an open door. This is a door ajar. And in some cars, you can see a little red light on your dashboard. If you don't close your door completely, you'll see a little sign that says door ajar. That means your door isn't closed completely. A breeze blew through the room, blue curtains at one end and out the other like pale flags, twisting them up toward the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling, and then rippled over the wine-colored rug, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up, as though upon an anchored balloon. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight round the house. I must have stood for a few moments, listening to the whip and snap of curtains and the groan of picture on the wall, and then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows and the caught wind died out about the room and the curtains and rugs, and the two young women ballooned slowly to the floor. The younger of the two was a stranger to me. She was extended full length at her end of the divan. completely motionless and with her chin raised a little as if she were balancing something on it, which was quite likely to fall. If she saw me out of the corner of her eyes, she gave no hint of it. Indeed, I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. So he goes into the room. There are two girls sitting on the sofa talking. One of the girls he knows, but the other girl he doesn't know. And she has a very rehearsed way of sitting, a very practiced way of sitting with her chin like she's balancing something on her chin. And she doesn't say hello, she doesn't say anything. And it's making him feel uncomfortable. Like, did I interrupt something? I'm sorry that I'm here. The other girl, Daisy, made an attempt to rise. She leaned slightly forward with a conscientious expression, and then she laughed. An absurd, charming little laugh. And I laughed too and came forward into the room. I'm paralyzed with happiness, she laughed again, as if she said something very witty, and held my hand for a moment, looking up into my face, promising that there was no one in the world she would so much wanted to see. That was a way she had. When somebody has a way, that means that is their manner, that is their habit, that is the way they do things. So Daisy has a way of making you feel very special. She hinted in a murmur that the surname of the balancing girl was Baker. I've heard it said that Daisy's murmur was only to make people lean toward her, an irrelevant criticism that made it no less charming. So she speaks very, very softly because she likes to draw people in and make them come closer to her. And well, that's what people say. But he didn't care. He liked it. He enjoyed that. Again, a sort of apology arose to my lips. Almost an exhibition of complete self-sufficiency draws a stunned tribute from me. I looked back at my cousin, who began to ask me questions in her low, thrilling voice. It was the kind of voice that the ear follows up and down, as if each speech is an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. Her face was sad and lovely, with bright things in it, bright eyes and bright passionate mouth. But there was an excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget. A singing compulsion, a whispered "listen," a promise that she had done gay, exciting things just a while, since that there were gay and exciting things hovering in the next hour. I told her I had stopped off in Chicago for a day on my way east, and how a dozen people had sent their love through me. "Do they miss me?" she cried ecstatically. "The whole town is desolate." So he's saying, I stopped in Chicago. Many people want me to say hello for them. And she says, "Oh, they miss me?" And he says the whole city is very depressed. All the cars have left their rear wheels painted black as a mourning wreath. And there's a persistent wail all night long on the North Shore. So he's being sarcastic. "How gorgeous! Let's go back, Tom, tomorrow." She added irreverently, "You ought to see the baby." "I'd like to." "She's asleep. She's 2 years old. Haven't you ever seen her?" "No." "Well, you ought to see her. She's—" Tom Buchanan, who had been hovering restlessly about the room, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. "What you doing, Nick?" "I'm a bondman." "Who with?" I told him. "Never heard of him," he remarked decisively. This annoyed me. "You will," I answered shortly. "You will if you stay in the East." "Oh, I'll stay in the East, don't you worry," he said, glancing at Daisy and then back at me, as if he were alert for something more. "I'd be a goddamn fool to live anywhere else." At this point, Miss Baker said, "Absolutely," with such suddenness that I started. Remember, started means like surprised. So this is the first time this girl spoke. And that surprised him. That's starting. It was the first word she uttered since I came into the room. Evidently, it surprised her as much as it did me, for she yawned with a series of rapid, deft movements, stood up into the room. "I'm stiff," she complained. "I've been lying on the sofa for as long as I can remember." "Don't look at me," Daisy retorted. "I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon." "Oh, don't look at me," Daisy retorted. "I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon." "No, thanks," said Miss Baker to the 4 cocktails just in from the pantry. "I'm absolutely in training." Her host looked at her incredulously. Incredulously means, I don't believe it. Credo means I believe, and incredo means I don't believe. So incredulously means, what? That's not true. "You are?" He took down his drink as if it were a drop in the bottom of a glass. "How you ever got anything done is beyond me." I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what it was she got done. I enjoyed looking at her. She was slender. Slender means skinny. Small-breasted girl, with an erect carriage, which she accentuated by throwing her body backward at the shoulders, like a young cadet. Her gray, sun-strained eyes looked back at me with polite, reciprocal curiosity. Out of a wan, charming, discontented face, it occurred to me now that I had seen her, or a picture of her, somewhere before. "You live in West Egg?" she remarked contemptuously. Contempt is with hate. "You live in West Egg? Ugh." "I know somebody there." "I don't know a single." "You must know Gatsby." "Gatsby?" demanded Daisy. "What Gatsby?" Before I could reply that he was my neighbor, dinner was announced. Wedging his tense arm imperatively under mine, Tom Buchanan compelled me from the room as though he were moving a checker to another square. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their hips, the 2 young women preceded us onto a rosy-colored porch open toward the sunset, where 4 candles flickered on the table in the diminished wind. "Why candles?" objected Daisy, frowning. She snapped them out with her fingers. "In 2 weeks, it'll be the longest day in the year." She looked at us radiantly. "Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it?" "I always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it." "We ought to plan something," yawned Mrs. Baker, sitting down at the table as if she were getting into bed. "All right," said Daisy. "What'll we plan?" She turned to me helplessly. "What do people plan?" Before I could answer, her eyes fastened with an awed expression on her face. "Look," she complained. I heard it. We all looked. The knuckle was black and blue. "These are your knuckles here." "You did it, Tom," she said accusingly. "I know you didn't mean to, but you did it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man, a great big hulking physical specimen. I hate that word, hulking," said Tom crossly, "even in kidding." "Hulking," insisted Daisy. Sometimes she and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively, and with a bantering inconsequence that was never quite chatter, that was as cool as their white dresses and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. They were here, and they accepted Tom and me, making only polite, pleasant effort to entertain or to be entertained. They knew that presently dinner would be over, and a little later the evening too would be over and casually put away. It was sharply different from the West, where the evening was hurried from phase to phase toward its close in a continually disappointed anticipation, or else in sheer nervous dread of the moment itself. "You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy," I confessed on my second glance of corky, but rather impressive claret. "Can't you talk about crops or something?" I meant nothing in particular by this remark, but it was taken up in an unexpected way. "Civilization's going to pieces," broke out Tom violently. I've gotten to be a terrible pessimist about these things." "Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard?" "Why, no," I answered, rather surprised by his tone. "Well, it's a fine book, and everybody ought to read it. The idea is, if we don't look out, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific stuff. It's been proved." "Tom's getting very profound," said Daisy, with an expression of unthoughtful sadness. "He reads deep books with long words in them." What was that word "Well, these books are all scientific," insisted Tom, glancing at her impatiently. "This fellow has worked out the whole thing. It's up to us, who are the dominant race, to watch out, or these other races will have control of things." "We've got to beat them down," whispered Daisy, winking ferociously toward the fervent sun. "You ought to live in California," began Miss Baker, but Tom interrupted her by shifting heavily in his chair. "This idea is that we're Nordics, and I and you are, and—" After an infinitesimal hesitation, he included Daisy with a slight nod, and she winked at me again. "And we've produced all the things that go to making civilization. Oh, science and art are all that. Do you see?" There was something pathetic in his concentration, as if his complacency, more acute than of old, was not enough to him any more, when almost immediately the telephone rang inside and the butler left the porch. Daisy seized upon the momentary interruption and leaned toward me. "I'll tell you a family secret," she whispered enthusiastically. "It's about the butler's nose. Do you want to hear about the butler's nose? That's why I came over tonight. Well, he wasn't always a butler. He used to be the silver polisher for some people in New York that had a silver service for 200 people. He had to polish it from morning till night until finally it began to affect his nose." "Things went from bad to worse," suggested Mrs. Baker. "Yes, things went from bad to worse until finally he had to give up his position." For a moment the last sunshine fell with romantic affection upon her glowing face. Her voice compelled me forward breathlessly as I listened. Then the glow faded, each light deserting her with lingering regret, like children leaving Pleasant Street at dusk. The butler came back and murmured something close to Tom's air, whereupon Tom frowned, pushed back his chair, and without a word went inside. As if his absence quickened something within her, Daisy leaned forward again, her voice glowing and singing. "I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose. Doesn't he?" She turned to Miss Baker for confirmation. "An absolute rose?" This was untrue. I am not even faintly like a rose. She was only extemporizing, but a stirring warmth flowed from her as if her heart was trying to come out to you concealed in one of those breathless, thrilling words. Then suddenly she threw her napkin on the table and excused herself and went into the house. Okay, I'm just going to take a 1-minute break and I will be right back. All right, thank you for waiting. Let's get back to the story. Oh, but I've lost my place. I have to find my place. Miss Baker and I exchanged a short glance, consciously devoid of meaning. I was about to speak when she sat up alertly and said shh in a warning voice, and subdued, impassioned murmur was audible in the room beyond, and Miss Baker leaned forward, unashamed, trying to hear. The murmur trembled on the verge of coherence, sank down, mounted excitedly, and then ceased altogether. "This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of is my neighbor," I said. "Don't talk. I want to hear what happens." "Is something happening?" I inquired innocently. "You mean to say you don't know?" said Miss Baker, honestly surprised. "I thought everybody knew." "I don't." "Why?" she said hesitantly. "Tom's got some woman in New York." "Got some woman?" I repeated blankly. Miss Baker nodded. "She might have the decency not to telephone him at dinner time, don't you think?" Almost before I had grasped her meaning, there was the flutter of a dress and the crunch of leather boots, and Tom and Daisy were back at the table. "It couldn't be helped," Daisy cried with tense gaiety. She sat down, glanced searchingly at Miss Baker and then at me, and continued, "I looked outdoors for a minute, and it's very romantic outdoors. There's a bird on the lawn that I think must be a nightingale, come over on the Cunard, or the White Star Line. He's singing away." Her voice sang. "It's romantic, isn't it, Tom?" "Very romantic," he said, and then miserably to me, "If it's light, even enough after dinner, I want to take you down to the stables." The telephone rang inside, startlingly, and as Daisy shook her head decisively at Tom, the subject of the stables, in fact, all subjects, vanished into the air. So the telephone rang and Daisy went, "Don't answer the phone," because that's his mistress, the woman he's having an affair with. I think Daisy is his wife. Among the broken fragments of the last 5 minutes at table, I remember the candles being lit again, pointlessly, as I was less conscious of wanting to look squarely at everyone, and yet to avoid all eyes. So he's feeling very uncomfortable now, and he wants to look at people, but he's so embarrassed by what's happening that he doesn't know what to do. I couldn't guess what Daisy and Tom were thinking, but I doubt if even Miss Baker, who seemed to have mastered a certain hearty skepticism, was able to utterly put this fifth guest's shrill metallic urgency out of mind. So the phone keeps ringing, and they're all just trying to ignore it and trying to pretend like nothing is happening. To a certain temperament, the situation might have seemed intriguing. My own instinct was to telephone immediately for the police. The horse, needless to say, were not mentioned again. Tom and Miss Baker, with several feet of twilight between them, strolled back into the library, as if to a vigil beside a perfectly tangible body. While trying to look pleasantly interested and a little deaf, I followed Daisy around a chain of connecting verandas to the porch in front. In its deep gloom, we sat down, side by side, on a wicker settee. Daisy took her face in her hands, as if feeling its lovely shape, and her eyes moved gradually out into the velvet dusk. I saw that turbulent emotions possessed her, so I asked what I thought would be some sedative questions about her little girl. So he can see that Daisy is very worried, although she's trying to hide it, and to make her feel better, he asks about her daughter. "We don't know each other very well, Nick," she said suddenly, "even if we are cousins. You didn't come to my wedding." I wasn't back from the war. That's true. She hesitated. Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything. Evidently, she had reason to be. I waited, but she didn't say any more, and after a moment I returned rather feebly to the subject of her daughter. I suppose she talks and eats and everything. Oh, yes. She looked at me absently. Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear? Very much. It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. When you don't know something, but you think it's bad, that's when you say that. So, God knows where my keys are. That means I don't know where my keys are, but they're probably in some really stupid, horrible place. Or maybe somebody is talking about something. God knows what you're talking about. And that means I don't understand what you're talking about, but I'm sure it's horrible, whatever it is, and I hate it. Or, where's John? God knows where John is. That means I don't know where John is, but it's probably something he's probably doing something really bad somewhere. So when she says Tom was God knows where, that means I don't know where Tom was, but it was probably somewhere horrible. He was probably with a woman, I think is what she means here. But she doesn't know for sure. That's just what she thinks. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. Wept means cried. All right, I said. I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow, she went on in a convinced way. Everybody thinks so. And the most advanced people, and I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything. Her eyes flashed around her in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with a thrilling scorn. Sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated. The instant her voice broke off, ceasing to compel my attention, I felt the basic insincerity of what she had said. It made me uneasy, as though the whole conversation had been a trick of some sort to exact a contributory emotion from me. So he thinks she doesn't even mean what she's saying. She's just trying to get a reaction from him. I waited, and sure enough, in a moment, she looked at me with an absolute smirk on her lovely face, as if she had asserted her membership into a rather distinguished secret society to which she and Tom belonged. Inside, the crimson room bloomed with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat at either end of the long couch, and she read aloud to him from the Saturday Evening Post, the words, murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tune. The lamplight, bright on his boots and the dull on the autumn leaf yellow of her hair, glinted along the paper as she turned a page with a flutter of slender muscles in her arms. When she came in, she held us silent for a moment with lifted hand. So she made them stop. To be continued, she said, tossing the magazine on the table, in our very next issue. Her body asserted itself with a restless movement of her knee, and she stopped. 10 o'clock, she remarked, apparently finding the time on the ceiling. Time for this good girl to go to bed. Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow, explained Daisy, over at Westchester. Oh? You're Jordan Baker? I knew now why her face was familiar. It was pleasing, contemptuous expression had looked out at me from many rotogravure pictures of sporting life at Asheville and Hot Springs and Palm Beach. I had heard some story of her too, a critical, unpleasant story, but what it was I had forgotten long ago. "Good night," she said softly. "Wake me at 8, won't you? If you'll get up." "I will. Good night, Mr. Carroway. See you anon." Of course you will," confirmed Daisy. "In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of, fling you together. You know, lock you up accidentally in linen closets and push you out to sea in a boat and all that sort of thing." "Good night," called Miss Baker from the stairs. "I haven't heard a word." "She's a nice girl," said Tom after a moment. "They oughtn't to let her run around the country this way." "We oughtn't to?" inquired Daisy coldly. "Her family?" "Her family is one aunt about 1,000 years old. Besides, Nick going to look after her. Aren't you, Nick? Nick is going to look after her. Aren't you, Nick?" So we're receiving some information about this woman that Tom says her family shouldn't let her be running around doing these things. I guess she's into some kind of athletic thing or horse riding or something. And Daisy says her family, she's got one aunt who's about 1,000 years old. That's her family. And then Tom says, "Well, Nick can take care of her. Won't you, Nick?" "She's going to spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think the home influence will be very good for her." Daisy and Tom looked at each other for a moment in silence. "Is she from New York?" I asked quickly. "From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white... Did you give Nick a little heart-to-heart talk on the veranda?" demanded Tom suddenly. "Did I? A heart-to-heart talk is a talk where you share your feelings very freely, where you're very honest with the other person. So when he says, 'Did you give Nick a heart-to-heart talk?' it means, did you give him a very honest and open talk? Maybe did you share a secret with him? Something like that. I'm not sure exactly what he means here. Maybe we'll find out in a minute." "Did I?" She looked at me. "I can't seem to remember, but I think we talked about the Nordic race. Yes, I'm sure we did. It sort of crept up upon us the first thing, you know." "Don't believe everything you hear, Nick," he advised me. I said lightly that I had heard nothing at all, and a few minutes later I got up and to go home. They came to the door with me and stood side by side in a cheerful square of light. As I started my motor, Daisy peremptorily called, "Wait! I forgot to ask you something, and it's important. We heard you were engaged to a girl out west." "That's right," corroborated Tom kindly. "We heard that you were engaged." "It's libel. I'm too poor." Libel is like spreading gossip, spreading rumors. So when he says it's libel, he means that's just a rumor about me. It's not true. "But we heard it," insisted Daisy, surprising me by opening up again in a flower-like way. "We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true." Of course I knew what they were referring to, but I wasn't even vaguely engaged. The fact that gossip had published the banns was one of the reasons I had come to the East. You can't stop going with an old friend on account of rumors, and on the other hand, I had no intention of being rumored into marriage. Their interest rather touched me and made them less remotely rich. Nevertheless, I was confused and a little disgusted as I drove away. It seemed to me that the thing for Daisy to do was to rush out of the house, child in arms, but apparently there were no such intentions in her head. As for Tom, the fact that he had some woman in New York was really less surprising than that he had been depressed by a book. Something was making him nibble at the edge of stale ideas, as if his sturdy physical egotism no longer nourished his peremptory heart. Peremptory heart. Already, what is peremptory? Preemptory. Admitting of no contradiction, express of urgency or command. Already it was deep summer on the roadhouse roofs and in front of wayside garages, where new red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. The wind had blown off the leaving a loud bright night with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. The silhouette of a moving cat wavered across the moonlight, and turning my head to watch it, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion, and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. So Mr. Gatsby, before Nick goes into the house after he gets home, he decides to sit outside and enjoy the night a little bit. And then he notices on the edge of the property his neighbor, Mr. Gatsby, looking up at the stars. And he's so rich that Nick is thinking, he's just thinking like which part of the sky he owns. Which part is his because he's so rich. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the darker water in a curious way, and as far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone in the unquiet darkness. Okay. Well, that was Chapter 1 of Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Thank you for staying and watching today. Next time we will do Chapter 2, I think tomorrow. Let me just look at my schedule. Oh, no, not tomorrow. So we can read Chapter 2 the same time on Sunday. All right, well, thank you for staying and watching until the end, and thank you for all of your questions and comments. And I hope you join me on Sunday when we do Chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby.